Are you troubled by strange noises?
Came out a 6-foot black silhouette of a cowboy with a cowboy hat. He had a duster on.
You said there's lights in the sky?
Yeah, there's 4 lights. It's moving real slow. Real slow.
It's showtime.
The Emit Blackwell Show, diving into the creative minds of sci-fi, horror, fantasy, and paranormal authors. Their fantasy is our reality. Welcome once again to the Emit Blackwell Show. Before we begin, I want to remind our listeners to share, like, and subscribe to our channel to get all of the updates on all your favorite independent authors. And today I'm here with Ken Stark. He is the author of 4 books, Arcadia Falls, Jitters, Stage 3, and Stage 3 Alpha. And Ken, how you doing out there today?
I'm very good, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, no problem. We appreciate you being here. So let's just jump right into this. When did you begin writing?
Oh man, I started writing before I can even remember. So it just seems like something I've always done. It was never really good, and I didn't always finish, but I just loved the idea of writing.
Yeah, and that's the best part is just jumping in, 2 feet first and just write what you feel, Yeah. But I also, this is kind of the rumor floating around the web, that you also do painting.
Well, I try, yes.
Well, we're looking at your artwork right now, and I'm telling you what, this stuff looks good. Did you ever try to pursue that as a career?
No. I mean, a person can dream, but no, I do it for myself, for I guess therapy, and I usually just give them away to family and friends.
Well, hey, they got some lucky family and friends out there. I'm sure that
tell them that.
I'm sure that some of our viewers here are checking this art out, and they're pretty astonished as well. So, now the Arcadia Falls. Okay, this is this the most recent book that you wrote?
It is, yes. Okay,
and what was the inspiration behind that? I love the cover on it, by the way. It's great.
I had just finished, I think I had just finished Stage 3, and I happened to ask my best friend's daughter, who was 14 at the time, I asked her what kind of books she liked to read. Mm-hmm. And she said something scary with a monster and some kind of mystery. Mm. But the clincher was the monster had to be something brand new. So I brought up, vampires, zombies. She said, no, it has to be brand new. Mm-hmm. So I ran with it, and I hashed out a storyline in a few days, and the more I dug into it, the better I liked it, and the cooler the quote-unquote monster is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's good.
So, yeah.
Because you can't just, throw together a Scooby-Doo mystery and give it to a 14-year-old and expect them to be like, hey, I like this. But, everybody's looking for something new, too. So that's great that you were able to adapt that to even this new upcoming generation of kids.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, it's not that I didn't write it to be like a young adult book. I really don't even like that genre, young adult, because it somehow, people know what they want to read. Doesn't matter how old they are, they know what they want to read. But yeah. I call it young adult because I kept the language fairly clean. And mm-hmm. that really is more to do with the young reader's parents than with the young reader.
yeah, exactly. Yep. And so, I mean, and because of the fact that you've listened to your gut, and you've also listened to your readers as well, you were able to gain quite a bit of recommendation or accreditation for some of the things that you've done. You've actually received a few awards.
A couple of awards, yeah. Yeah.
So,
Arcadia Falls just won a new Apple Award, so that's I'm kind of happy about that, because Arcadia Falls really is my labor of love. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so, and you had another one. It was, what was the other one that you had?
The other award was a Reader's Favorite Award for my first book, Stage 3.
Okay, and because of the awards that you've gotten, and was it something that you had to submit to, correct?
Yes.
Okay, would you suggest that authors do that with their writing or with their books or anything like that?
Yes, absolutely. Provided they think that it's good enough. And of course, no writer is ever going to think his writing is good enough.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think it stands a chance, it is worth it. It's worth. I mean, it costs money. Everything costs money,
Mm-hmm.
but it's worth it. It gets you a lot of exposure. And even if you don't win or are a finalist, you still get publicity.
Yeah, and with that, with the cost of it, I mean, you have to think when you submit your work to somebody who is going to read it and review it and check it out and take their time with it. They have to be able to have those people to do that, and that pays for those kinds of things. So, I mean, for the price of a submission, I mean, you go to a college, submitting to a college costs money. Submitting to just about anything costs money. So, I mean, I guess what you're saying is definitely worth it. So,
I mean, I would never pay for a review because that just has that taste of being biased. But this is not biased. A contest, everybody pays the same amount of money, and independent people read through it.
Yeah, and that's great. I've seen quite a few authors on the web who do have these awards, and I'm sure that some of our listeners who are aspiring authors might just wonder, how do I even get into running on something like that? So that's good that, could you do me a favor? Could you, after the show, can you send me a couple of links to those award submission areas, so in that way I can provide the information to our readers about how to get involved on some of these award submissions and things like that?
Sure, absolutely.
All right, cool. So, in the premise of Arcadia Falls, what is actually going on in this book?
Well, Arcadia Falls is a small town in the U.S., and it becomes clear early on that something's happening in town. People are disappearing, and no one seems to be taking any notice until one high school senior gets curious, and he starts to look into it, and he discovers that something evil is actually preying on the town.
Oh, boy.
I'm not going to spoil.
Don't give it away.
Give spoilers.
Yeah.
So with nowhere else to turn, no one's coming to help. He turns to his few friends, and they will then have to stop this evil thing, or they might very well vanish too.
Wow. So what type of characters do you have in this? I mean, who's the main character? You said it was a senior, correct?
Yep, the main character is Tyler. Most of the characters are in their last year of high school, so they're just about to go their separate ways, go off to college or go off to work. And there are also a couple of older characters. There's one teacher and one of the girls' grandfathers.
Oh, okay, that's good. And so, like, you were talking to your friend's daughter about this. Were you pulling a lot of experiences that she had in her life, or was it experiences that you were having when you were in high school to build this? It was
mostly me. Honestly, once she gave me the premise, I didn't even tell her I was going to write the book. I just went home and did it. So the main character, Tyler, is a lot of me. He's a lot smarter than I was, but he has a lot of my characteristics. And the others are all just an amalgam of everyone I've ever met in my life.
Yeah, and that's a great place to pull from those characters, is experiences that you've had in your life and, other people have had in their lives. And it's just amazing how, like, for example, like Stephen King's It, that I think pulled a lot in on his view of his childhood and the fears that he had.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you did the same thing, somewhat the same thing with this one, is pulling in those ideas.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
What we're going to do now is, and you've advised that the prologue is quite mysterious. We're going to go ahead and read that prologue here for our listeners, and we ask everybody to join in. If you've already purchased the book, you can just read right along, and hopefully there won't be any chimes when the page turns. And here it is, the prologue of Arcadia Falls. Prologue. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. He scraped up another handful of pebbles and picked out the best of the lot. Then he took careful aim at the boulder in the middle of the river and let them fly. one after another after another. They arched gracefully over the water, striking the face of the boulder with a gentle tap, tap, tap. And the cute little girl, with the big brown eyes and the face full of freckles, giggled. He scraped up another handful and picked out the best of the lot, and this time he handed them to the girl. She watched the pebbles tumble into her tiny little hand, as if they were the shiniest of jewels, and then she smiled at him, and he felt his heart skip a beat. The first pebble landed short and disappeared with a plop, and the girl giggled as the river carried away the ripples. So he shared with her his secrets about the overhand throw and the special flick of the wrist, and she tried again, and this time the pebble plopped into the water just inches shy of the target. On the third try, the pebble hit the boulder square on the face, so they both cheered and laughed and high-fived, and then there was that one single lifetime of seconds when they just sat there and looked into each other's eyes. He scraped up another handful and picked out the best of the lot. And after they'd all tumbled into the cute little girl's hand, he gave her one more he'd kept separate. It was the prettiest pebble in the world, he told her, because it had the same flecks of gold that she had in her eyes. And then he watched a smile swell those beautiful freckled cheeks as she tucked that most special of jewels carefully away in a pocket. Tap, tap, tap. Before long, the cute little girl with the big brown eyes and the face full of freckles was as good as he, and they both scraped up handful after handful, tossing them at the boulder in the middle of the river with a steady tap, tap, tap. But then the riverbank gave way, and the girl slipped into the water, and though he grabbed for her again and again, her tiny little hand stayed always, just desperately, out of reach. She called out his name over and over, even as she floated away, but the river was swift, and it soon carried her into the strongest currents. And when she finally floated far enough away that he couldn't hear her anymore or see her anymore, he sat back down, scooped up another handful of pebbles, picked out the best of the lot, and resumed throwing them at the boulder, one after another, tap, 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 tap. He sat bolt upright in bed, his face dripping with sweat. He took a moment to let the awful images fade away, and then he plucked his wet pajama top away from his skin and breathed a sigh of relief. A dream. Thank God it was just a dream. He lay back down to find a pillow wet with sweat, so he flipped it over and settled back in, pulling the covers close around his neck. Suddenly he was shivering, but he knew exactly where to lay the blame. Even in the dead of winter, the last thing his dad always did before bed was turn the thermostat down. It was a ridiculous ritual, but he had already heard the whole "I don't pay to heat the whole neighborhood" lecture more times than he cared to remember. So even shivering in bed, with hailstones pattering against the window, it just wasn't worth tiptoeing out to try to sneak the needle back up a few degrees. Well, maybe it wasn't all bad news, after all. If the storm kept up all night, maybe they'd even cancel school tomorrow. Sure, his dad would make him shovel the driveway, but that was a small price to pay for... Wait a second. That's not right. A flood of recent memories washed through his mind and swept away the last wipes of half-remembered nightmares. He and his buddies in the park. An ice cream truck, playing its too loud music. Bigger kids hogging the place with their frisbees and skateboards. But that was just yesterday. It wasn't winter. It was summer. So what the... It was the nightmare. That's what it was. The nightmare that made him sweat through the pajamas and left the middle of the bed all cold and wet and clammy, enough to make him shiver. The stupid little boy nightmare he couldn't even remember anymore. Stupid little boy nightmares, he thought. And suddenly he couldn't wait to be grown up so he'd never have nightmares again. He rolled onto his stomach and let his head sink into his pillow. As he drifted back through the nebulous world between reality and dreams, he heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. It was hail. Hail pelting against the window. But it couldn't be hail. It wasn't winter, it was summer, and besides, the tapping was too regular, too deliberate. For all the world, it sounded like someone was standing just outside, tapping out a message in Morse code. Could it be one of his friends, maybe? Someone paying him a late-night visit? No, not a chance. No one he knew would be caught dead wandering the streets at night. He climbed out of bed and padded across to the window. Then he stopped just short and listened again. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Okay, someone was definitely outside. No doubt about it. Someone was standing on the other side of the window tapping on the glass. He had the sudden idea that it might be a burglar, and his heart skipped a beat. But what kind of burglar knocked to get in? No, this had to be someone he knew. One of his friends, not wanting to wake the whole house. But in the middle of the night? Well, if one of his friends was that desperate, there was one thing he could do. His parents wouldn't like it, but friends help friends no matter what. And so, the entire matter settled at last, he reached for the curtains and threw them open. And his blood turned to ice. That wasn't a friend. This wasn't even someone in a Hamburglar mask trying to break in. This was, oh dear sweet Jesus. He had the briefest glimpse of ugly red eyes. Then the thing on the other side came suddenly to life and began skipping and dancing across the window from one side to the other and back again. Then it reared back and threw itself bodily at the window, and for one horrible moment, he was sure that the glass would break. But he made no move to run. Through it all, his own terror kept him rooted to the spot, and it was all he could do to suck in a breath, release it in a whimper, and watch the unimaginable thing flail against the glass. At last, after an eternity, the rattling stopped, and the thing held perfectly still. It peered in at him across a space of inches, and then, another eternity later, it sank slowly out of view, and all he could see beyond the window was a deep, fathomless night. And even as he stood there, unable to move, unable to cry out, and unable to make sense of anything he had just seen, a new sound erupted from out of nowhere. It was a scream. A child's scream. It went on, filling the fathomless night. And then came the pounding of feet across the ceiling, and the frantic little bursts of shouting from above. So he knew he hadn't imagined it. The scream had awoken his parents, and in another few seconds the rest of the neighborhood would be awake too. He kept watch at the window for the lights that were sure to come on all up and down the street, and he watched for the dozens of neighbors who would emerge from their houses and come to join him in his fear, so that he could tell them of the monster he'd seen right outside his window. But they didn't come. Not a single neighbor emerged. Not a single light went on. Eventually, the feet stopped pounding, and then the frantic little bursts of shouting stopped too. And once the whole of the night grew, as still and silent as a graveyard, he uprooted himself from the spot, drew the curtains closed, and padded back into his bed. He climbed between sheets still moist with sweat, and laid his head on a cold, wet pillow. And by the time he began to drift back to sleep, he had already convinced himself that it must have just been another dream after all. Just another dream within a dream. All that we see or seem. The words he barely knew wandered through his wearied mind, and eventually faded away into nothingness. His last conscious thought was of the freckled girl, but then she faded away too, and as sleep came to reclaim him, he became distantly aware of the last sound. It was the sound of a baby crying far, far away. A single heartbeat later, that too was silenced, and he fell into a deep, restless sleep. All right, and we're back. Great story, Ken. It just really kind of gets the reader started in on this whole world that you've created. I'm sitting here wondering if I should just keep reading the book right now, but we got this show to run, so. So now, where can people find your stuff? Where can they purchase your books right now?
All of my books are on Amazon. If you go to my website, kenstark.ca, because I'm in Canada, all the books are listed. There are excerpts of all of them and links to all of them. They're all available on Amazon, like I say. There's also an audio book of Stage 3 that you can get on iTunes or audible.com. And I think Barnes & Noble is carrying them all. But like I say, if you go to my website and there's links.
Now, I got kind of
there.
a follow-up question on that, too, because you just mentioned audiobook. How was that experience for you when you got to hear somebody else read one of your entire stories?
Oh, that was just the coolest thing. There was actually one line that I can't even repeat because it's not good for radio. But when I heard that line, that made it real for me.
Yeah, and because everything's moving in that direction, it seems like the more natural way to do things. And just talking to you here right now, you're giving your listeners and your readers a whole nother dimension of who you are. So I want to thank you for doing that and being here on the show, definitely.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Oh, before you go, what advice would you give a new writer, somebody who's just getting their feet wet?
I always tell writers the same advice. Write what you want, when you want, how you want, the way you want. If you've got a dream in your head, pursue it. Get it down on paper. It can always be changed, So do the thing you want and follow your bliss.
Exactly. Well, we want to thank you once again for being here. Remind you once again to share, like, and subscribe to the channel to get all your updates on your favorite independent authors. This is Emit Blackwell signing out. Keep on reading, keep on writing.
Are you troubled by strange noises?
Came out a 6-foot black silhouette of a cowboy with a cowboy hat. He had a duster on.
You said there's lights in the sky?
Yeah, there's a four lot. It's moving real slow.
It's showtime.
The Emit Blackwell Show, diving into the creative minds of sci-fi, horror, fantasy, and paranormal authors. Their fantasy is our reality.